What is going on, guys? Today we're going to talk about a sneaky technique, and those are the techniques I love to use, and that is shallow water drop shotting. You've probably heard about a drop shot a whole bunch for offshore fishing, fishing deep, but one thing that gets neglected with a drop shot is those shallow waters, especially in late spring, early summer, all the way through summer. These bass really move up into those shallows, whether it's to spawn, whether it's because there's grass that grows up. So you have a whole wealth of cover and a whole population of fish that you can target, but the generic or the standard kind of technique that you normally use is something like a Texas rig or a jig. And the key to those presentations is it keeps your bait on the bottom. What's really cool with shallow water drop shotting is, just like you know with a drop shot, you have kind of a leader on there, and basically that bait is elevated off the bottom. And what's nice is, especially in spring, these fish are looking for areas that warm up quick, and oftentimes that means like gooey bottom, gunky, mucky bottom. So dragging a Texas rig, dragging a jig means kind of gunk and not really getting your bait seen, because it's grinding into a bottom that's super soft. It's almost burying itself. So that drop shot really allows you to keep that bait elevated, fish those areas that are warming up pretty quick, but keep that bait right in the face of those fish as they're swimming around in those shallow flats. One really cool thing that you can do with this shallow water drop shot relates to spawning fish and sight fishing. You know, my buddy Jacob Wall, a great MLF Pro Circuit angler, he taught me a little trick when it comes to bed fishing and sight fishing. So you got these fish on bed, you can see them, they're locked on, you're throwing a Texas rig, you're throwing a jig to them, but they just won't go nose down on the bait. They won't react to that bait being on the bottom of their bed. And the biggest key to sight fishing and fishing those beds is to really get those fish aggravated. So he was telling me how basically you can use that drop shot to keep the bait right in front of the nose of the fish if they're not willing to go nose down. You got to play with your leader length depending on the depth of water that you're in, but basically you can pitch that thing, get it on the bed, and you can basically suspend it right on that bed, shake it, and sometimes even let it slowly fall to the bottom, since there's really no weight on the bottom when you give it slack line on the bait. And it's a real sneaky way to sort of trigger fish and keep that bait in front of the fish's nose, which is the biggest key when it comes to fishing for spawning bass that are locked on beds. So let's break down the anatomy of a drop shot. What do you need to do this technique? Well, the first thing you're gonna need is a hook. I recommend a small, like octopus style hook like this, especially if you're fishing more open style water, in those flats, in those shallow areas where there isn't a bunch of grass and cover. If you're fishing around like heavy cover and putting this thing more into kind of, I don't know, some tight spaces around docks or into trees, kind of like you see in this pocket that we're in, I'd recommend using a small straight shank hook so you can rig that bait weedless or snagless so you're not hanging up all the time. The other thing you're going to need is a little drop shot weight just like this. And the key to these drop shot weights is they have a little pinch point right there. And what it's nice for doing is basically I can pop that line out and slide it up my leader a little and then pull up once again, and I can basically vary the length of my leader to adjust to the depth of water that I'm fishing. So if I'm shallower, I can shorten that leader. If I'm a little bit deeper, I can lengthen it. So you can kind of play around with it and customize it. When it comes to baits, I like something that's a little more streamlined. This is kind of a fusion of a jerkbait and a little finesse worm. Smaller, more compact presentations are kind of key for me, because I really look at a drop shot as something where you're sort of shaking and gliding the bait through cover or down a flat. You really want to be able to twitch this thing and impart a very subtle vibration to it. Generally, and when I say generally, I mean 90% of the time, I'm fishing this guy on a spinning rig, spinning reel, spinning rod. There's one very special exception to that, and that's when it comes to bed fish. If I got a big like 8-pounder, 7-pounder, 6-pounder on a bed and I'm fishing, sight fishing for that bass, and I need a little heavier gear in order to present and get that fish out, I'll go up to bait casting gear. 15, 20-pound fluorocarbon, and it's actually a technique called power shotting, using a little heavier weight, a little heavier gear, but really that's the exception to the rule. 90% of the time I'm going to be running a spinning rod like this, and there's a couple key features to it. When we're doing this shallow water drop shotting, usually it's kind of tight quarters. You can see we got a bunch of trees around us. It's small casting spaces. I'm not looking to bomb this castaway down. I'm making little pitches, short little flick casts, kind of underhand little, you know, just toss crosses to kind of put the bait in specific places. So I like a little like 6'10" rod. It all depends on how tall you are. I'm about 5'9", so 6'10" suits me. If you're a little taller, go a little longer. If you're a little shorter, go a little shorter. But a 6'10" medium action rod will kind of get you through just about whatever. I got a pretty nice spinning reel on here. The reason I recommend a nicer spinning reel is it's very important to have a very smooth drag when you're doing the shallow water drop shotting, because oftentimes you're fishing light line. We have 14-pound braid to an 8-pound fluorocarbon leader, and sometimes I'll even go down to a 6-pound leader. So we're fishing with lighter line. It's a finesse kind of technique and approach fishing in shallow water. So you need a drag that can handle a bigger fish, manage that bigger fish, but not break that lighter line. So what are you looking for when you're doing the shallow water drop shot technique? You can tell we're kind of in a tight space back here. I like either creeping in or fishing like a little bit of a flat, but that's also why I like to use that little bit shorter rod. But I'll kind of flip this thing around. You got a tree right there. I'll pick little isolated pieces of cover that I can see, or I'll make long casts and kind of drag across a flat where I think the fish might be moving into spawn, or they might be chasing brim or bluegill or on the shallows. But what's nice about a drop shot, especially fishing it in shallow water, it's a very easy bait to manage, especially on a spinning rod. I can take that thing and just kind of flip it right over there. I can make a lot of short sort of flip and pitch casts to very specific targets, give it a couple shakes, reel it up, and move on to the next target. But at the same time, I'm still keeping my bait above the bottom. I'm not just letting it drift down to the bottom and just bury down in whatever the bottom composition is. It's keeping my bait elevated so those fish are going to see it. It's going to be right in their face.